On this week's episode of the Going Commando podcast, we unfortunately provide you analysis from the Commanders' loss to the Philadelphia Eagles, get you ready for Dallas week as we take on Dallas in Dallas. We talk about the injury report, we go over how the Commanders are debuting their black jerseys, and much more. So without further ado, let's get the show started. Welcome to Going Commando, a Washington Commanders podcast.
Welcome back to yet another episode of the Going Commando podcast. I'm your host, Chris, along with my co-hosts, Tom and Clark, coming off of not exactly the best game we were hoping for, rather a terrible and ugly L to the Philadelphia Eagles last Sunday. Tom and Clark, I just kind of want to throw it over to you guys. What do you think we did wrong, and what do you think went right, if anything?
Yeah, absolute heartbreaker against the Philadelphia Eagles. It's hard to lose to a team that throws D-cell batteries at Santa Claus, and when it does happen, it hurts a little extra. Now, one of the things that I will say, a positive that I already have coming out of this game, Carson Wentz, I don't think it was your issue, man. 0 TDs, 0 interceptions. Not the greatest line, but Clark, as I'm sure you're going to emphasize here, that offensive line was just horrible.
Offensive line was atrocious, and of course there's the injury concerns going on there right now. You mentioned it's not all on Carson. I don't necessarily think that you can completely blame the offensive line for every single sack or mishap that took place in the trenches and behind the line of scrimmage. I think Carson Wentz, maybe had a little bit of time sensing some of that pressure. In some of those instances, you need to step up in the pocket. You need to be aware of where a guy is, coming in from behind you. He gave up, I believe, 2 fumbles in that game. So, while his stat line, wasn't anything glamorous, and you look at the offensive line, those sacks given up, I think Carson, this was the first game that we've seen a Carson Wentz that, we've been warned about.
Yeah, this game clearly showed Carson Wentz being brought back down to earth. There's no way. I mean, I don't know that off the top of my head, but there's no way he's, in that top 5, quarterback, in terms of, yardage and touchdowns, things like that. I'm fairly certain he's back down much lower in the ranks. And I completely agree, Clark. I think he was completely oblivious to pressure. I mean, I think there is a good amount of that blame on the offensive line, which played very poorly, but there's situations there, and we would see it many, many times, throw the ball away. Carson Wentz seemed like he didn't even know that was an option. At times he would just hold on to it for way too long. And it just, I was really disheartened to see just the lack of, ability to get the ball out in a timely manner. It just kept like he was doing the same thing, not adjusting. I honestly, I think it's a coaching failure more than anything else. And we can, absolutely get into that a bit more. But overall, really disappointed with the play from Carson, and really hoping that he can make those adjustments needed.
And those are adjustments that we did see in the second half against Detroit, and we did see an improvement in the fourth quarter offensively against Jacksonville in week 1, who I might add is looking very, very strong right now. That win that we got week 1 could end up looking a lot better than it did at the time. But, this second half, sure, Philadelphia didn't score, but they scored all their points in that second quarter, 24-0. And we only scored 8 in the second half, whereas in other weeks, this team maybe rebounded a little bit following a tough start. This start certainly was nothing to write home about. It was a terrible start, and I mean, quite frankly, a terrible finish.
When are we going to have a good start, Clark and Tom? That's what I want to ask you guys. We're always saying, oh, yeah, we had a slow start, and yeah, really weren't able to make the adjustments necessary at halftime. Well, when is the story going to be? Oh, we're off to a great start, and really had the opposing defense on their heels. Like when's the last time we heard that?
I think the best opportunity for that, honestly, is going to be when we get Chase Young back on that defensive line and we have Brian Robinson back healthy. So probably somewhere closer to week 7 or 8. Now, obviously, you can't blame all of this on the offensive line. 6 players did get sacks in this game for the Eagles. TJ Edwards had 2 sacks and 10 tackles. Brandon Graham, 6 sacks, 6 tackles, 2.5 sacks, pardon me. Hassan Reddick, 4 tackles, 1.5 sacks. Fletcher Cox, Josh Sweat, and Javon Hargrave all with about 1 to 1.5 sacks. Tough game. You say rough start. I honestly think that the issues with this team, as we've been saying for years personally and now publicly on the show, we don't have the team that we need yet. And it almost is infuriating to see a team with such a great history and such a dedicated fan base, at least among us as fans and the fans that we know. It's just frustrating to see them put out a product on the field that almost feels inferior to every other product in the league. Now, do I believe that we are inferior to every other team in the league? Hell no. We can be any team on any given Sunday. That is my mentality as a fan. That's my mentality as a player. That's my mentality as a person. Now, was there bright spots? Yes, I absolutely believe there were. Carson Wentz not throwing an interception, that's a huge thing. I think Taylor Heineke gets in that game. I think it's the same number of sacks, possibly an interception or 2 more, especially with the way that Avonte Maddox was playing that entire game. He had a very solid game. Antonio Gibson getting the bulk of the rushes. Our receiving core starting to kind of figure out where its depth is and figuring out who the top guys are. Those are all bright spots that I can find from last game. So I'm curious to see what you boys think about in terms of bright spots.
Cheerful about the game than I am, Tom. I mean, I think that, if Heineke was in there, I actually think he might even have a bit better pocket presence, or at least a little bit more ability to maneuver out of some of those sacks that Carson Wentz took. Now, not here saying we need a quarterback change. I'm not advocating for that either. I think Carson Wentz is still our best, guy to put forward on that field to win at quarterback. But in terms of bright spots, I think Jonathan Allen had a solid game, as he always does. I thought that Jamin Davis, again, actually had a decent game, all things considered. But overall, just a very poor showing from that O-line, from the offense, just stagnation in general. And then the secondary just continues to underwhelm and underperform. And I really, again, like I said earlier, it comes down to coaching. I think that if Rivera keeps giving us this, the reason that we didn't win is because, we have to get our guys, in better position, to be successful, or, the guys were where they need to be. They just need to make a play. That's just BS coach speak that doesn't really resonate with me as a fan. And I would hope that he would be taking more ownership to the failures that this team is looking at and has been experiencing so far this season. But I haven't really seen that from Rivera. So I think it's a coaching issue.
Well, and you mentioned Rivera. I don't think it's Rivera. I've told you boys this many times. Jack Del Rio in that zone blitz scheme just doesn't seem to be working for me. Now, obviously, you talk about Jamin Davis having a big game, 2 sacks, 6 tackles, 1 tackle for loss. That was one of the biggest highlights of our team this entire game, and it looks like nothing when you compare it to the Eagles. Cole Holcomb, great game, recovered 9 tackles, 1 pass defense, 1 QB hit. Cameron Curl playing in one of his first games of the season, 8 tackles, 1 tackle for loss. F.A. Obata getting 1 sack, 3 tackles.
Very true.
This is the highlights. This is the highlights of our team. The highs are so low. They almost, you talk about mountains and valleys with highs and lows to teams. We have freaking hills and Grand Canyons with what it seems like with our guys. So I just don't know how to react to this team, man. I just don't know. I'm trying to take a positive view. I'm trying not to be that guy that gets down on a team before week 4, but geez.
Well, I think we have to ask ourselves, is this really a reflection of our team, or is this a reflection of Philly playing really well, especially on offense in that only that second quarter. I mean, we held them scoreless despite, probably the discrepancy in yards. We held them scoreless for 3/4 of that game. So if that's a positive that you want to take away, if there's a positive that you want to take away, that's certainly it. But like we've said, I really don't think there's too many. And the one thing that I wanted to harp on from this game, again, as Chris mentioned, was the secondary play. I mean, in Philly, that's a team that has two very talented wide receivers, but there comes a point when you have to ask yourself, can any of these guys make a play? Like, yes, it's a tough ask to be guarding these guys when Philly has the great run game. You have to be cognizant of that. And they have two great wide receivers. But I mean, week in and week out, these guys have not lived up to, the standard of play that we've expected out of them, both William Jackson and Kendall Fuller.
Absolutely. And you bring up that receiving core for Dallas. One person, or if not for Dallas, pardon me, for the Eagles. One person you do think about is Dallas Goedert. Tight end, 3 catches, 26 yards, 1 touchdown. It's a talented team over there. And I did a deep dive into the numbers on the offense, trying to figure out, was there something that seemed abnormal? The offense looked like it worked exactly as it should. Antonio Gibson getting 12 carries, Curtis Samuel getting 3 carries, JD McKissick getting 3 carries. The only abnormality in this entire thing is that when you look at targets for the Commanders, 10 to Curtis Samuel, 9 to Terry McLaurin, 8 to Jahan Dotson, and 9 targets going to JD McKissick last game. He hauled in 6 of them for 32. I just don't know where the issue is with this team. I just can't see it. The offensive line is the biggest one for me. And even I didn't think that they played all that horribly. I definitely agree with you boys that Carson Wentz could have made better decisions in the pocket, that his presence was a little bit lacking at times. I just don't know. I don't know where we go from here.
Well, those JD McKissick targets are a reflection of Carson Wentz having absolutely no time to throw the ball. And he probably often just had to check it down. And even if he was looking down the field, his pocket presence was so terrible that he was probably on the ground by the time the guy was open. So it's things like that probably that might not show up in the stat sheet that kind of explain some of those things. And moving forward here, our next team, they've got a pretty solid defensive front as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think if we're just looking at the stat sheet, you don't think that this game was as bad as it actually looked, and I think it was in every sense just as bad as it looked. I mean, I think, well, first off, glad you call out the FAO Bada sack. Had to give kudos to our boy there.
Respect.
Of course. Elite player with elite role player for this team, of course. But I don't think you see a guy like Rashad Wildgoose in the starting lineup. Next week. I mean, I guess he'll still be on the team, but he played absolutely awful. You mentioned Dallas Goedert. When he scored that touchdown against us, Cam Curl absolutely whiffed on that tackle to stop him. So it's like these guys in our secondary. I don't know if it's what Del Rio is coaching them, but I feel like these guys don't know how to wrap up or tackle. They just fling their body at a high speed towards the feet of a defender and expect everything to work out. That just all that does is a high percentage that you miss, take you completely out of the play, maybe even take some other teammates, fellow defenders out of the play, and just looks awful. And I see our guys doing it week in, week out. And really, yeah, I agree. When is Kendall Fuller, when is Will Jack going to start playing well? I mean, St. Juice is the only guy in our entire secondary, apart from Derek Forrest week 1, that has shown me any sort of level of competency.
Well, you mentioned Rashad Wildgoose. Again, I mean, hats off to that name. That is just an outstanding name. But
is a good name.
I don't
name,
know
horrible coverage.
Great name, but not exactly a great player to have on the field when you're facing this Philly offense that boasts of weapons like Devontae Smith, AJ Brown, Dallas Goedert. You've got one of the best dual threat QBs in the league. This guy we signed off the street like less than a week ago is playing significant snaps and gave up 2 really bad pass interference penalties. I mean, first of all, why is this guy I mean, no disrespect to him, but like, come on, like he's playing in a significant role in our defense, and you didn't have him at all in training camp. Like, what does that say about them being able to progress some of the players they had on this roster to get them ready to play? You know, we have to bring in this guy Wild Goose, who I don't even know where he came from, and hopefully we don't see him playing as much going forward if he continues to play like he did
Yeah,
on Sunday.
yeah. No, I totally agree. And I think it just exposes how poor our depth is. And I think, again, it goes back to a problem with the coaches. We kind of sat on our hands apart from Carson Wentz this whole offseason while everyone else in the division was going out and making moves. Now, I'm not saying we need to go make a huge splash, but we clearly needed to shore up our depth after losing some key guys. And, clearly we didn't have what it takes. I mean, we cut Danny Johnson, you cut Corn Elder, you cut these guys that were the depth at corner last season, and you really didn't have a plan in place to get, adequate talent to replace those guys. And not saying that those guys were anything special, but it's really showing, and it's just showing just a lack of willingness to make adjustments on the fly, just a lack of a willingness to admit that maybe what you're doing isn't working and then it's wrong. And you can't just, stick to the same damn script every week or every season for that matter and expect to get different results. That's the definition of insanity.
Yeah, and Clark, you mentioned where Rashad Wildgoose is from. He's actually from Wisconsin, interestingly enough. Big school. He was a guy that, wasn't expected to do much, was a practice squad guy, signed on to our team, kind of an injury concern. What's interesting, though, is that we drafted Christian Holmes and Percy Butler this year, and yet I can't really think. I mean, I've seen Holmes on the field quite a bit. I haven't seen Percy Butler out there at all, it seems like. So it is curious to me to see that the team is willing to take guys off of the waiver more readily than they are to take guys that they drafted.
That's not a good nod towards Percy Butler at all. The fact that he hasn't been playing like that and really getting any significant snaps on the field, despite being a fourth rounder, like that doesn't bode well for his development and what they're seeing in him at all.
Yeah, and they were saying that he was impressing in camp and in the off season. So, and I was really excited to watch him in preseason. He played, a little bit here and there, but I guess wasn't good enough to make it into, a regular season game. Not yet. Maybe you give the guy the chance, he'll show you something. Who knows?
Possibly, but one last note I'd like to leave you all on here. And if you are watching the Eagles coming up in the future, this might be something to keep a watch on. The Eagles have not scored a single point in the fourth quarter of any games yet this season. That is true for the Lions game. That is true for the Commanders game. And that is true for the, who did they beat right before us? Gosh.
Minnesota.
Thank you. The Minnesota game.
I think Philly's definitely going to need to score some points in the fourth quarter this week. And it's weird to say, considering that Jacksonville is a team that we did beat in week one, but they have looked really good the last couple of weeks. They beat the Colts, shutting them out in that game. Then they absolutely walloped the Chargers last week. And it looked really good on offense and defense. So they're two pretty hot teams in Philly and Jacksonville. I think that it could end up being a pretty good game. And maybe they are going to need to score some points in the fourth for them to pull that one out.
Yeah, and tough game, big game this week against Jacksonville. We look like legitimate contenders coming off of that week one win, and we have our issues. So let's see how we can recover, and let's see how the Eagles deal with them. Now looking ahead to next week, we do have the Dallas Cowboys, and they are coming off of a gigantic win over the New York Giants, 23-16. Cooper Rush still starting at QB for the Cowboys, getting a win. Daniel Jones not having a single passing touchdown and an interception. What do you boys take away from that game?
My primary takeaway is that at least I feel that these two teams and their coaches are putting them in a position to be successful and win, which is what I don't think our staff is able to do right now. I did watch the Cowboys Giants game, and it was honestly a largely uneventful game in terms of scoring up until the second half. I think it was maybe 6-6 or something like that going into the half, something along those lines, very low scoring. Not necessarily because of one reason or another. I think the Giants put on a good show. There's not too much talent up there in New York, but I think they clearly are rallying around their coach, their new head coach, Dable, and he's putting them in a position to win with the talent that he has. And from a coaching perspective, that's all you can ask for. And so I really don't think, again, harping back to the coaching staff, I think we need to try and emulate that a little bit more. And both at the end, and I'm not saying I like McCarthy on the Dallas side at all. I think McCarthy, is probably one of the worst coaches and one of my last choices that I would choose in a head coach. But, at least he's able to rally the troops and put together a win. I think Cooper Rush looked, serviceable. And I think that with the talent that they have around him on the offensive side, definitely going to be a game that, we cannot take lightly. We really can't take any game lightly at this point, but, I think it could be a good matchup. I'm not counting us out by any means yet. But again, that loss against Philadelphia last week does not have me in the highest of hopes.
It's a tough loss to be coming off of and then have to go face your biggest rival in their house the very next week. But, I don't know. I was a lot more nervous going into the Philly game last week, if that even makes sense following the game that we just watched. But with this Dallas team, I really do think that we have a legitimate chance in this game. One thing to note is that their defensive line might be even scarier than Philly's in some places just because of the pure talent. Micah Parsons might be the best defender in the NFL. And, our offensive line is going to have their hands full, certainly with him. But outside of him on the defensive side, Trayvon Diggs, of course, made a big interception. He's a playmaker, but, New York Giants were putting up some points against them, had a couple of nice drives. And we certainly have the air raid offense to combat that if we can give Carson Wentz enough time. So I think that there's a chance that we can pull this one out. And another note, it's going to come down to our defensive line as well. I think that, making Cooper Rush a little bit uncomfortable. I don't know if that's something that he hasn't really experienced as much throughout the first 2 games, but if our defensive front can get going, I think that gives us a chance.
Yeah, when you talk about this Cowboys-Giants game, I mean, there's 2 main storylines in my opinion. I would say that the first one has to be Saquon Barkley finding his juice again, bringing those Giants into a position where they might be the 2 team in the NFC East if they continue to go on a run like they were before this Dallas game. Now, Clark, I think you're absolutely right. That defense for the Cowboys is extremely difficult. We have a mutual friend who has been, let's just say, hyping this game up quite a bit amongst us. And obviously, this is a game that we've had a little bit of trepidation towards. As we had all I believe, now I will check this for next podcast, but I believe we all have this as a loss against the Cowboys. Now Cooper Rush, you say that week 1 when Cooper Rush first gets installed after Dak goes down, I'd take this as a win for us. But you see the way that CeeDee Lamb has been playing, Noah Brown, Peyton Hendershot, tight end for the Cowboys, Tony Pollard looking like the guy that we all said was better than Zeke. It's a tough game, man. These Dallas Cowboys, if you remember last year, came in and absolutely embarrassed us on our home field. And that was actually an interesting game for me last year because I was on the road with my father coming back to DC. And I was losing signal. And every time I would lose signal, the game would come back with 7 more points for Dallas. So big game for us. Big game for us to show what the frick we're made of.
Yeah, it is a big game, and now I want to be optimistic too, and I hope that we win. And it's not really, I'm not too necessarily worried about the Dallas offense. I don't think it's terrible, but you see the game last week, CeeDee Lamb, that he's had some drops so far this season and he's looked good at times, but just okay a lot of the other time. And Zeke can turn it on at times, but we all know that he's maybe past his prime, and Pollard is what Pollard is. I'm not really too worried about the offense. I mean, our defense, I'm more worried about our defense than their offense, but agreed that Dallas defensive line is scary. If you thought 9 sacks was bad last week, I mean, don't be surprised if we see that number increase this week, especially with our line continuing to be a little bit banged up, shifting things around, shifting guys around, up and down the line there. So, as much as I would love to feel a little bit more confident, I just can't really say with confidence that I think that we're heading into this game in good shape. But hey, I mean, we'll have black uniforms on for the first time, so it's all okay, right?
Yeah, it's all fine. I mean, it's going to look cool for the cameras. I'm sure social media will have a cool post. So don't worry, guys. We have
It's all
alternates
good.
now.
Woohoo.
No, and you bring up those black uniforms. This was the one that I believe got the most hate on the internet in terms of the uniforms because of the W on the forehead of the black helmets. How do you boys feel about these uniforms? I really like them. I like the black. I like the gold. I think that burgundy and gold is a great color scheme, but I think that black, gold with burgundy accents, absolutely beautiful. So what do you boys think about it?
I think that they kind of look like the Steelers uniforms a little bit with, obviously there's some differences and we have some burgundy thrown in there, but the numbers, I don't know. I wasn't super excited about them. I'm honestly am more curious as to why we haven't worn the burgundy jerseys yet. We've worn the white jerseys in 3 straight games. And I think that the burgundy jerseys are pretty clean. So, and I feel like that also, that jersey would evoke a little bit more nostalgia in fans. So I'm curious as to why we haven't gone with those yet. But as for the black uniforms, I think overall, I mentioned they look a little bit like the Steelers, but I think that it's at least cool to see that we have an alternate jersey. I mean, that's not something that we really ever did. We had throwback jerseys for a number of years, but something completely different and kind of, jumping out of our main color palette. I think it's definitely interesting. And, hopefully they play well in them.
As Ron would like to say, that's interesting, but not necessarily important. I'm gonna have to see them really, because I don't love the look of them just based off the pictures, and I'm sure, hey, we could flash up the different uniforms here for the fans out there. Make up your own mind, but I like the white ones. I kind of like the white on white, but I just think white on white looks good pretty much whatever team you're playing as. So I like the white jerseys. I would like to see burgundy come into play. So we'll see. The helmet with the W there, it's a little sus if you ask me, but maybe they look better in person. I thought that the jerseys were so, and then I saw the white ones, live, and I thought they actually looked better than I expected. So hoping for a good surprise there. But hey, if we can pull out a win, we could be wearing any color. I really would not care. We could be wearing polka dot for all I care.
You can't forget the subtle callback on these alternates to the Washington football team era with the numbers also on the helmet. So, real
like
good
that.
real good on the organization to follow its roots and, back to the glory days.
Yeah.
Never forget the mustard color rush Commanders jerseys, which were not used one single time the entire color rush season. They were absolutely legendary. They should have come out of the box once, and we should have all been forced to watch a game where everyone looked like a giant bottle of Heinz mustard.
I think that somebody watching that would have gotten sick just by default. I mean,
yeah, the players might have vetoed that. I think that's honestly what happened there is the players were like, we're not going out in these. Sorry, coach.
You're telling me a bunch of grown men didn't want to look like walking mustard bottles? I am shocked. And Clark, just to mention one quick thing, a mutual friend of ours I texted during the podcast, asked him for a quick Cowboys take as a Cowboys super fan. He hit me with this. I'm curious to hear what you say. Cooper Rush is the 3rd best QB in the NFC East. Not sure how much I believe it, but I believe it enough to say it loud.
then who's fourth? Who's he saying is fourth? Is it Daniel Jones or Wentz?
I personally think it's Daniel Jones is probably 4 if you're asking me, but I think he might be intonating Wentz.
I mean, I don't hate Daniel Jones this season, honestly. I know like some of the stat lines might not be that pretty, but I think he's, given his teams a chance to win clearly. And I don't necessarily hate Daniel Jones. I don't think he's been playing all that bad.
I don't know that it's Daniel Jones really willing himself to victory here, or willing his team to victory. Like I do like his sneaky mobility. He definitely pulls off some nice runs every now and then. But I mean, if you had to give a player comparison, I would describe him as like a Walmart Josh Allen. He can like he has an arm. He's pretty good at running. Like I won't take that away from him. But obviously not at the same level. But if you're on a budget and you need something good, you can always rely on that great value brand to come in
Yeah.
clutch. And I think that's what Daniel Jones is maybe becoming. It's also interesting to make that comparison as well because his head coach is Dable, who helped develop Josh Allen in Buffalo. So maybe there's something there brewing for the Giants, but
That's interesting. Yeah, I mean, hell, I'll take Walmart Josh Allen over what we saw out of Carson Wentz last week any day. So, it could be worse.
This could technically be a more Cowboys take than we're even thinking because he could have it listed as Dak, Jalen, Cooper, Daniel Jones, Wentz. And that is a very Cowboys way of looking at the NFC East. You immediately put the Eagles and you put the Eagles below the Cowboys still, but you put the Giants and the Commanders below both of you. So just an interesting take here. Now moving on, we do have an injury report for the game this week. It does seem that Michael Gallup will be playing for the first time this season. Not to mention DeMarcus Lawrence being limited in practice. Connor McGovern, the guard. Dalton Schultz was also limited. Jaron Kearse, safety, limited. Multiple commanders also limited. Only DNP this week, or only 2 DNPs this week. Charles Leno Jr. and Wes Schweitzer, both on the offensive line. Any thoughts from you boys on that?
I think they probably needed the rest after that game at Philly.
Yeah, hopefully we get both of those guys back. Interestingly enough, I've heard a little murmurs and rumors about potentially having Nick Martin get the nod at center. I know we signed him last week, I believe, and he's actually the brother of Cowboys guard, Pro Bowl guard at that, Zach Martin. So maybe he's got a little bit of that spark or juice in him, hopefully. And
That's some mind games right there by the coaching staff. Just
exactly.
Playing chess, not checkers. Put your
right.
brother. You have to play against your brother. See how fired up he really is to win now, huh?
Well, you also,
Hope so.
they needed that break because they worked so hard to stop the Eagles' defensive line from getting to the quarterback. And when you work that hard and you do such a good job, you really do deserve a break. Now, one person I did want to mention here, full participant in practice, caught his first catch of the NFL season this week. Last week, pardon me. Dax Milne, 1 reception, 12 yards, full participant, looking to be kick returner and punt returner again for week 4. The dog has always been in you, young man. Keep it going.
Pretty sure that was in garbage time, but no disrespect to Dax. I would like to see a little bit more out of him on kick returns. I think punt returns, he's fine, but let's get B-Rob back in the mix so we can get Gibby back there and have a spark when it comes to our special teams.
Yeah, and that's something that I think against Dallas could be pretty big because they've got that guy Turpin, who I don't know if you've seen, but he's a really great returner. I believe in preseason he had like 2 in the same game against New York Giants. He had a big return to set them up. He's also the USFL MVP as well. So, I mean, that's certainly not something to overlook. So Dax Milne is going to have to respond, this week when he faces up against Turpin.
I thought dog fighting was illegal, but it seems like two absolute pit bulls are going to be on the field this week, and I am excited to see which one leaves the field first.
And going back to what you mentioned at the beginning of this topic, Michael Gallup was the tried and true number 2 receiver for Dallas. They signed him, I believe it was 2 off seasons ago, to a new contract. That's good for them that he'll be back, and they're going to need him to perform. Although Noah Brown has been sneakily pretty good for them in his absence, but I'm sure Michael Gallup and fantasy owners of Michael Gallup are excited for him to be back. Anyways, as we continue down the injury report, there's another notable return that we have to mention. It's Brian Robinson returning to practice. He's hit the field last week, is participating in drills, and is, looking like he's been able to recover from the injury that he sustained a few weeks ago pretty well. And last I checked, he was on track to return in around week 5. You can correct me if I'm wrong on that, but it certainly seems that he's trending in the right direction, which is awesome to see. And our offense could also really use the boost in the run game.
Yeah, and Brian Robinson was a guy that we were all pretty high on coming out of the draft, and when he got shot, I mean, it's such a shock whenever something like that happens, and to see the positive outcome for once as a Commanders fan, eh, it's something to look forward to. And I said it last week. In every one of these games so far, I've seen opportunities where Brian Robinson probably would have gotten the ball 3, maybe even 6 times a game coming off of the injury. So it's really just exciting to see him back out there. And I think that I speak for all Commanders fans when I say that we're happy that you're healthy, kid. Get back out there.
All right, and we'll close this out here with a couple questions. So for all the fans out there, get ready, see if you can keep up the pace with us here. But my first question, I'll throw out an easy one for you guys. Who was the last starting running back in a Washington Redskins uniform?
Ooh, okay. So that it was 2019, correct?
2019.
We had Samaj till 2018. He wasn't there
I
for the
think
last
I have
season.
my answer, but I can defer to you, Tom.
Well, hold on to a second. I'm just trying to talk through this really quickly. Obviously, Antonio Gibson is on that team. JD McKissick, I believe, is on the team by that point. That might have been his first year. You know what? Screw it. I'm gonna take a guess here. Clark, you go ahead and go first, though.
The answer is Adrian Peterson, APAD all day.
That was not my guess. I was actually going to go with Antonio Gibson, thinking that maybe it was just an obvious answer, but
Ding, 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 ding. Adrian Peterson, your boy, all day. Gibby is a good guess. He actually, and there was a little bit of crossover in that offseason that Gibby was a rookie, and then when AP was kind of still in camp that year. But believe it or not, the last Washington Redskins starting running back is Adrian Peterson, and I know Clark knows that I'm a huge Adrian Peterson fan. Love him to death, and I guess if there had to be a guy to go out as the last Washington Redskins running back, would like it to be AP. I have no problem with that.
It was sad to see him go down to Le'Veon Bell a couple weeks ago, though.
It was.
Yeah, I mean, he got socked, and at that point, that also might have been, kind of a nice metaphor for potentially the end of his playing days. I hope to see him out there again someday, but I doubt it.
I'd love to see him out there again, just because I love AP, and I still disagree with the decision that Rivera made to let him go. I mean, I think he would have gladly accepted a role similar to what Peyton Barber fulfilled for us that year in 2020. being a change of pace, kind of more short yardage guy. I think he just wanted to play, and he liked it, what he had, the home he had found here in Washington. So I don't know, but it is what it is. Hope our boy gets picked up. Maybe here potentially, or at least
Shout out
another
Peyton
fight.
Barber though.
Shout out Peyton Barber though. He had to make an appearance one way or another on this podcast.
Absolutely. And I have a question for you boys here. And this is going to be a little bit more of an interesting one because we haven't really done this yet, but I kind of want to do a Price is What Right question here with you boys. In 2019, we had our worst point differential of the modern era of NFL football. So past, I believe it was 1965, maybe 67 is the cutoff for that. Can you guess without going over what our point differential was? Now, I will tell you it was a negative, and the highest we had ever had, now this is obviously before 1968, was 1954. We had negative 225 points allowed. We had 432 points allowed to 207 points for, giving us a point differential of negative 225. So can you Price is Right guess what the point differential for the 2019 Redskins is?
That is a great trivia question.
So are you talking about like combined like points for, points against all the
Yes,
games?
so in the 2019 season, we played 16 games. We had X amount of points allowed and X amount and Y amount of points for us. When you take the difference between those two, you get the point differential. Can you Price is Right guesses? So you cannot go over. In this case, maybe, say you say negative 225. You are over the guess in that case. So
Well,
Well,
thanks
this
for
is
giving me a nice parameter there. I won't go over negative 225.
well, that's abstractly horrible. That is one of the worst point differentials of all time, by the way.
Well, this was the season we went 3-13, so it's got to be pretty bad.
Correct. It is the third worst all time. It is the worst in the
No
modern
way.
era.
Are you
Third wor-
serious?
Third worst point differential of all time.
Oh
Uh,
man.
it is the worst in the modern era for our franchise.
Oh.
Let's go
I'll
minus.
go 150.
I was gonna say minus 199.
Ooh, and with Clark being over, Chris, you win. It was negative 169. Nice.
Nice.
Not so nice for when we had to actually watch that product.
Yeah,
on the
not so
field.
nice for us.
That
Exactly.
that is one of the worst. That honestly probably was the worst
Sheesh.
year of Redskins football that
Really
I
bad.
have ever remembered.
I do hate to mention it after you give us such a great anecdote on Adrian Peterson and his time with the team, but it is the worst point differential in modern history for our franchise.
Yeah.
So important to know.
He was one of the few bright spots of things that I could even get excited about during that year and the year before. So yeah, doesn't surprise me, sadly though.
And without that year, we would have never gotten Chase Young. So, I mean, who really won?
Yeah, look who's laughing now.
Now, that was not our worst year in terms of points allowed. And this is true. The worst year in points allowed for the Commanders franchise happened in 2013. Can you guess how many points we allowed this year? Now, I will let you know 2019 is third on this list with 435. That will be your bar. That is the third place. I am looking for number one.
Let's go. I'll go 500.
501.
Wow, both of you are over by somewhat a lot. It is actually 478 points allowed in the 2013 season. That was under I believe that was the last or second to last year of Mike Shanahan as our coach. I know it
Yep.
is the last year because the next year we bring in Jay Gruden. And the next year is actually, ironically enough, 2013, our worst year in points allowed, 2014, our second worst year in points allowed. The next year after that,
Ugh.
2019. The next year after that, 2021 was our fourth worst year in terms of points allowed as a franchise. So,
Wow.
And honestly, that right there is just why it was so bad for us to come in. And not saying I didn't enjoy it, but for us to come in for Ron's first year as a head coach and somehow sneak out an ugly divisional championship, where we're walking away NFC East champions that year. That was honestly potentially one of the worst things to happen in terms of setting expectations way too high for the fan base going into to that next year. And obviously we still had we were still 7-9, but we're no longer divisional champions or anything like that. So that I'm not shocked to hear these numbers, Tom, and it just kind of plays into the whole. I just think we were set up from the beginning to have disappointment just with those kind of maybe misleading expectations after that year.
no, absolutely. And I think this is indicative of the product that we have been seeing now, and hopefully that we are going to change in the future. I mean, allow that many points, and you look at what they actually scored on offense that season: 334 for the worst year, 301 for the next worst, 266 for 2019,
Oh,
contributing to that horrible, 335 for 2021. You know, it, it's unexcusable as a fan, and as an owner, I don't know how you allow and I'm going to call them out by name for this. I don't know how you allow Mike Shanahan to do that to your team. I don't know how you allow Jay Gruden to do that to your team. We talked about Bill Callahan before this. I forgot he was our interim, and thank God that guy doesn't have a head coaching job somewhere else, because that is absolute dog water that you give us a negative 169 point differential. And then to make it worse, our current coach, Ron Rivera, and this is the part that I can't stand about this. 2021, when they show these, if you're looking online at these stats, when they show this, the names next to him, the highest approximate value player for 2021 was Taylor Heineke. The best passer for that team was Taylor Heineke. This should prove to you, undoubtedly, as a Washington Commanders fan, that Taylor Heineke is nowhere near our effing future for this team. I want to curse. I want to throw my head underwater. I want to be changed to a Giants jersey. Hell, I will wear a Cowboys jersey if they start Heineke this year. It'll be unexcusable seeing how this turned out if you put Heineke in the game. Unexcusable.
I love Heineke, and I'm a Heineke fan, and I do like him. Kind of, I liked him last year, and I still like him now. But thankfully, I don't think Ron's in a position to be, taking Carson Wentz out of the starting role. I think he's kind of put his chips in one basket, and he's kind of going to be sticking with Carson through thick and thin, at least this season.
So my trivia question, kind of going off what you had mentioned, Chris, about winning the division and then having a lackluster season the next year. Can you guys tell me when was the last time that this franchise made the playoffs in consecutive seasons? When was the last time that we made the playoffs in back-to-back years?
Now, off the top of my head, I'm immediately go to Kirk Cousins wild card versus the Packers, and trying to remember if there was a wild card berth around that. So I don't think there was. Has to be in the 90s, don't you think, Chris?
Yeah. Honestly, though, like I'm trying to remember. I don't think Kirk did it twice. I really don't think Kirk got us there twice. So I think it's back in the 90s as well.
Ooh, I'll take the first stab at it here. I'm gonna say, so I know that we won the Super Bowl in 91, so I'm gonna say 91, 92. That's the best guess I got for you.
Okay, I like that guess. I'll go. Well, I know we made it in '99, but I don't think we did in 2000. Um, I'll just go. I'll go 87, 88.
So Tom will actually be correct on this one. We made the playoffs from 1990 to 1992 with that 91 season being the Super Bowl year. However, you were kind of close with that, mentioning the Kirk Cousins playoff loss to the Packers. The very next season, we went 8-7-1 and lost to the Giants in the final game in what was a win and in
That
situation.
went and in. You're right.
That's
So-
right.
That's right.
So
Yeah.
we
Right.
would have made the playoffs if it wasn't for big game Kirk in that situation. But nonetheless, you have to go back all the way to 1991 and 92 to the last time that this team had won consecutive, or rather had made the playoffs in consecutive seasons.
And I guess that was 3 in a row, right? Like you said 90
Yes.
through 92.
That was 3 in a row.
Wouldn't that be nice?
And from a stretch from 1982 to 1992, so for a 10-year stretch, we only missed the playoffs 3 times. Can you even imagine that?
Let me tell you what, we have
Fantasy.
seen teams with Rex Grossman, Josh Johnson, Mark Sanchez, Ryan Fitzpatrick, the list goes on and on.
Might I add that 2 of those seasons in 85 and in 89 were 10-6 seasons that we finished 3rd in the NFC East and didn't make the playoffs. So, pretty
And they
good
call it a weak
stuff.
division.
Some guy named Gibbs was coaching the team. I think they were pretty good.
So yeah, that guy, that Gibbs guy sounds familiar. I think he was good somewhere else too, but yeah, I think that if we were able to make the playoffs, if we were able to make the playoffs this year, which extended format, we would have a chance to if we were able to get into the 2 seed in our division. I wouldn't feel confident about us repeating next year. That's the issue. This team is such a question mark in terms of where we're going as a future and what we're looking to do as a franchise. That the idea of even going to one playoff series nowadays is a faraway dream for me as a fan.
Hey, well, it starts this next week when we beat the Sox off of Dallas in Dallas and turn this season around, right, guys?
We want
Right.
Dallas.
We ready?
We want Dallas. Come on, let's go.
We ready?
Do we want Dallas?
We
We
ready?
want Cooper Rush and Noah Brown.
For y'all.
I would like to see Cooper Rush take some sacks and some hits from our fellas up front. If our guys can just, bring the heat. We need a showing out from John Allen, Payne, and Sweat. Really need those guys to bring it this week.
Amen.
And maybe we'll be a little surprised come Sunday afternoon.
If anybody's gonna do it, it's us. In terms of putting some pressure on the guy, if our defensive line plays like they're supposed to. I mean, we got more talent than his 2 wins this year were Cincinnati and New York. We definitely have better defensive lines than they do, so you never know.
And with that, we'll wrap it up. Looking forward to this game on Sunday. Really hoping that we can come out with a win. We will see. But with that, hope everyone has a great rest of their day. I'm Chris here with Clark and Tom. Remember, HTTR and HTTC. We'll see you next time.